Wisconsin statutes.
Thank you, Carol. Okay, moving on then to the meeting agenda has been presented. We'll go to next, number 5, public comment. Is there anyone here that would like to address the board? Yes, ma'am. Come up and state your name, please. We'll give you 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. Linda Zilmer, Edgewater property owner. This evening I'd like to address one agenda item and one item that I don't think made it to the agenda. The first one is when you get to item number 12, the zoning committee chair report, 12B, the zoning amendment request. That is from a May rezone, and there are statutory provisions, and I'm looking at it now, but on a small screen, I don't think I can read it to you in the 3 minutes. At one point, the zoning committee was looking at changing dates of their zoning public hearings so that they wouldn't be at this meeting on a Thursday night followed by a public hearing on Friday. But there are provisions in state statutes that allow neighboring property owners to file a protest. There are other things too, why that rezone should really be acted on in June. And so being the short notice as far as being the public being able to see what was on your agenda, I only saw that tonight. Otherwise I would have contacted you sooner. The thing that I would like, hopefully maybe some county supervisors will request that it be on the June agenda, Act 125 or 185 that the Finance Committee had little discussion on and acted quickly at the end of a very long meeting to not approve to come forward. These are very difficult times. I appreciate that every supervisor who represents their district has an ability to act on whether the county takes emergency measures or anything like that. And what Act 185 would do would delay the July 31st due date of your property taxes and also waive interest. Other counties such as Barron County have passed that. And the meeting, being able to view it online, I could hear Tom Hoff, the administrator, but I could not hear what the treasurer explained why. I understand that there are kinks in Act 185, and maybe when they passed it in the legislature, they didn't realize the domino effect of counties having to make payments to schools and other taxing districts. But you know what, maybe that's a lesson the legislature needs to learn, that when they, in an election year, pass something that makes them look good and dumps a problem in your lap, then they need to fix it all the way down the line. But I really do believe that the Finance Committee, even though they did not recommend that be passed by the board, I think every single supervisor should be able to vote on that and hear the full reasons why. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to approach? Okay. If not, then we'll move on to number 6, minutes from our previous meeting.
I move we approve them as presented.
Mr. Duffy?
I move we approve them as presented. Both of them?
Both of them?
Right.
Mr. Hellwig? Okay, I got a motion by Mr. Duffy, second by Mr. Hellwig to approve the Surrey County Board meeting minutes as presented for April 30th, 2020 and April 21st, 2020. Is there any further discussion? If none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, moving on to number 7. 7A, we are not ready for. We will bring back to the June meeting. 7B, zoning committee appointment. We had a zoning committee set up, and we had one status of a supervisor that lives within the city, something we overlooked, so they cannot sit on the zoning committee. Discussed it with Mr. Hoff, my vice chairman, Dale, and Rebecca, our council. So we decided to move Mr. Betcher in as a permanent standing committee member, and I will sit as the alternate. So with that new appointment, I would entertain a motion to approve. Mr. Hellwig?
Motion to approve.
Mr. Kinsley? Okay, I got a motion by Mr. Hellwig, second by Mr. Kinsley to approve the new zoning committee appointment. Is there any further discussion?
Yeah, are you gonna be there?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Buckles.
You're
Okay.
just asking.
Any other discussion? If none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, moving on to number 8. COVID-19 update with our public health officer, Ms. Julia Lyons.
Good evening, everyone. I guess you've gotten used to seeing me come to the board meetings. I have an update that I actually have just put that together this afternoon, so you don't have it on your iPads, but it is up online here. One of the things that we wanted to update you on is, we'll go to the next slide, please, is the Supreme Court decision. And what that means for us. So I got my things a little mixed up. So with the Supreme Court decision, we have 25202, and that is what the decision was made on as far as the decision that Palm could no longer have Safer at Home. And that is the powers of the duty and the department. And part of that decision was because there is administrative rule that they have that they can work through committee to be able to get more buy-in, get community input on that, and the legislature input. And so they designated that they no longer can have an order like that. And it was the other thing that I'll talk about a little bit later is that it was too broad. It wasn't specific enough. And so 25202 is what the decision was based on. Now, last time I was here, we talked about the local health officer ability to place orders, and that falls under 25203, the duties of the local health officer. And then number 1 is really that me or my team needs to immediately investigate and report to governing bodies and the department of any communicable diseases. And then number 2, and that one I'll read verbatim because it's a little bit shorter. Local health officers may do what is reasonable and necessary for the prevention and suppression of disease, may forbid public gatherings when deemed necessary to control outbreaks or epidemics, and shall advise the department on measures taken. Number 3, I also, if local authorities fail to enforce communicable disease statutes and rules, then the department can take charge. And number 4, no person shall interfere with the investigation under this chapter. And so what does that really mean? Well, it does mean that I can still write orders, but because of the decision that was made, it does impact the enforcement of the orders. So if we go to the next slide, 252.25 is the enforcement of the order. And the way that the decision was written, it does take some enforcement considerations that we need to look at. We do have a public health ordinance in place, but we do need to validate that it still fits with the decision that the Supreme Court brought through and that we would be able to enforce any orders. And so what we're doing right now is taking a look at the ordinance, making sure that we are able to actually follow through both on communicable disease, but also on health hazards to make sure that nothing was impacted by that, because we do want to be able to be sure we're able to follow through. Whoops, and we're missing our screens. And so then the next one that I want to talk about is, what does that really mean? What would my potential future orders look like? And how would those orders be driven? And so I know that's kind of a concern. Would I go back to Safer at Home? That's not a reality. We wouldn't be able to put something like that in place. Again, the reason why that decision was made, it was too broad. And so when I look in the future at if we do have to put orders in, and at this time I want to kind of step back and say, I did place an order, but that order is strongly recommend that all businesses put in the best practices that WEDC put out, and also that everybody continues with social distancing. So it's only a strongly recommended, not an absolute order at this point. So if I would look at what orders could potentially come in the future, I would use surveillance data. I'm not going to tell you that if we get to 20 people that are positive at one time, that orders would go in place. It would really make a difference as to where those happened. So if it happened within a business, we could probably work with that business to help control that. If it happened in one large gathering, we might be able to manage through some of that. If it's happening in multiple arenas, we might have to think about orders. So that would be how we manage those things going forward. The other thing is they'd probably be in 2-week increments, which initially, when we talked about safer at home, we kind of thought they would be in 2-week increments, but they really needed to pull that to be longer. One of the reasons for that is we didn't have testing and everything in place that we needed to help to control. And now we feel like we have strategies to box things into place. So that's where we would be looking. Just to give you an example of an order that may come into play or may not, one of the best practices is that we don't have self-serve stations. So no salad bars, no condiments, that type of thing. That is an area that if there is self-serve open and salad bars, I would actually recommend that would be a place that you kind of want to stay away from. Order your salad and have it made for you. Everybody's touching all of these things, and it's just an area that is high likelihood that we could become infected along the way. So that is kind of where we're at right now when it comes to the Supreme Court decision. Does anybody have any questions?
Oh, Mr. Becker.
Yeah, quick question. So on April 30th, we extended the county's emergency order by 60 days. If that order was not in effect, could you still make these orders at your will?
The chapter, I have statutes under the Wisconsin state statutes under that chapter. So the emergency declaration helps us in other ways. So,
okay, so then what other ways does that help
financially, it helps us to be able to redeem expenses through the federal emergency grant, and for me to actually be able to hire and get people in or do different things that I need to be able to do very quickly instead of kind of going through those lengthy processes.
Okay, yeah, that's what you said at April 30th. And then when a member of this board questioned you if that was going to affect the citizenry of the county, you said it wouldn't, but then you used that extension in the May 6th order. You noted that as authority to issue the order that we have to wear face masks in the courthouse. So I'm trying to clarify, if you don't need the county-wide order, then why do you need to reference that in the May 6th order?
It does help give stability that the board is helping to support me in these processes. So by helping state that we're in the emergency declaration, it does give additional support, but it does not discriminate. It does not mean that I don't have that authority. It just helps with that explanation. And that is kind of as far as my legal brain can go on this. That would be an additional piece that I'd want to go to Corp Counsel for in writing those pieces.
Okay, so you said that 25 or 252-03 says you have reasonable authority to impose these orders. But in the order on May 6th, it said you used some very restrictive language, some of the most restrictive in the state, if not the whole country, where you said that you want to stop the transmission of COVID-19, not suppress it or quell it or slow it. You said to stop it, which...
And I will be more careful in that language going forward because I'm not looking at stopping. There is no stopping this. It would be suppressing, and I will take the additional time to make sure we're using the proper language as we go through. And appreciate the comment.
Just last question. Are you looking at any of the possible health effects or implications of actually wearing a mask? Is there any negative effects of that?
We have been looking and using CDC guidance along the ways, and This order most likely won't stay in for a long time. I am using our guidance that we're seeing coming through, and that will be kind of the next thing that I share with you. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, I gotta go. Thank you, Mr. Betcher. Mr.
So
Duff.
who is going to enforce this specifically?
What, the masking in the courthouse?
Yeah.
At this point, we don't have true enforcement. So
Nobody really.
So our ordinance looks like we can cover it, but we want to take it sure and make sure that our ordinance does cover us. So that's where we're kind of in the in-between right now.
And we use the term strongly recommend.
Yes.
Correct. Mr. Helwig.
Say like bars or, that's a big one that's just opened up, and I think it was down south, we saw that people just, as far as enforcing that, is there anybody?
Unless we write orders that say that only so many people can be in there and so many things can, you have to stay so far away. There is no enforcement. I did not write orders in that. I just maintained this particular order for the courthouse. And the reasons for that was because I hadn't had my testing back and I didn't have good surveillance with that. So as we go forward and if we look at a big outbreak in different cases, we're going to have to figure out what's the best type of order to write if we need to write one. So I want to be very specific in orders. I don't want to have blanket orders. This is one group that I know that we're constantly meeting in large areas. So that was the reason behind the masking in the courthouse.
Okay. Thank you very much, Julia.
Okay, so I want to just go back in. I have just a couple more slides and then we will be done.
Okay.
I just wanted to give you our current state. Our current state right now is that we have 7 positive cases. That is 3 more that came out of mass testing. 3 are recovered, and at this point, 611 negative cases. And again, those, when I say cases, those are specific people. There might be more tests that those 611 people might have had. They might have multiple negative tests. Those are specific to those people. And then the next slide is the mass testing. We had mass testing on Thursday, May 14th in Winter. We tested 102 people. On Friday, we tested 262 people in Hayward. From that, we had people that came from out of the county, which we expected. We had 5 positive results. 3 were from Sawyer County, 2 were from other counties. What is very interesting from that is this is one of the testing sites that we allowed asymptomatic people to come. And there were actually 4 of our cases that had absolutely no symptoms. So that makes us more concerned that we have people, because if you feel healthy, you're out there walking around in the community. We're telling people to stay home when they're sick. But if you don't know you're sick, you're going to be out and about. And again, that's where the masking comes into play, because masks are not for protecting ourselves. These kind of masks are not personal protective equipment. These are not what you would wear in the hospital or healthcare system. These are meant for protecting other people. So if I have it and I'm cough or I sneeze, maybe I have an allergy, I'm not spreading it to somebody else. So that's the intent of that. The next slide is just.
I got a question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Who was, Mr. Olson?
Yes, 5 out of 364. Is that within the standard deviation for the test as far as false positives?
I didn't check that.
Because it certainly would seem so, especially if they were asymptomatic.
Okay, we will look into that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Olson. Good.
Okay, and then for funding. We have COVID-19 funding. We're already going to be receiving that to help through the testing and all the additional work that we've had to go through in the health department. And there will be some CARES funding that will be coming down. Additional funding for the rest of the year. I don't know what that looks like yet. It was just announced. So I wanted to be able to let you know that that's going to be coming through. The focus will be on contact tracing and coordination and helping to prepare us for the fall when influenza and COVID will be in the community. And then the final one, I already talked about the masking and, oops, I'm sorry, I got a blank slide in there. Masking and the importance of that. So that is it. Does anybody else have any questions for me?
No?
Okay.
Appreciate all you do, Julie.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you so much. All right, then, moving on to number 9, Land, Water, Forest Resource Committee Chair Report. Mr. Paulson.
At the Land, Water, Forest Resources Committee, we approved the bids for the May timber sales. The forester tells us that the price for the timber is holding steady, and that if the weather holds and where we are year to date, he expects that it's more likely than not that we'll meet our $1.8 million budget.
Mr. Paulson, I asked you in that committee meeting if there was a chance we could come in higher than our projected revenue amount. And can you explain the answer to that? And can we produce more revenue through forestry during these times when we're losing revenue in other areas? Okay,
the forester indicated that he's pushing the upper limits of the timber that we put out. We're under the DNR regulations. They have regulations that limit the acres of cut, and we're pretty close to the top of that limit.
Okay, thank you. Anything for Mr. Paulson? If not, then we'll move on to number 10, Health and Human Services Board Chair Report. Mr. Schleter.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Not a lot to report. Julia was at the meeting, gave us a very interesting and in detail report on the coronavirus. The staff has given us presentations department by department, overviews of what each department does as sort of an orientation for new members and to reorientate the existing members. Other than that, there were no motions, so that's the end of my report.
Okay, any questions, comments for Mr. Schleter, Health and Human Services? No, if not, thank you, Dale. All right, then we'll move on to number 11, Economic Development. ADRC.
Oh, I'm sorry, I had it written down here and I forgot.
Okay, sorry.
Frankly, I don't know what we're supposed to be doing about that. It's a statewide thing that we had nothing to do with. We have no plans to celebrate it. I have been appointed to the ADRC board since January. They are working with an interim, the 4 or 5 counties north of us and us are working with an interim director, and she got hit with the coronavirus, not personally, but as her interim directorship was just forming, here come the coronavirus and has made it very difficult to have a meeting, let alone a meeting that could take place in a place where everybody could join virtually. So this is the local ADRC, they're going about doing their job, but we haven't had a board meeting on that yet. And that's as much as I know about it.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Schleter.
Mr.
Sorry I
Chairman?
missed that.
Mr. Chairman?
Oh, yes, Mr. Olson.
I think the reason of having it on the agenda is just to recognize the ADRC for what they do for our county in the Northwest, as well as other parts of the state. And I think it would be appropriate to at least mention that the Board of Supervisors appreciates the staff in Sawyer County and in the area.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Olson. All right, then, moving on to number 11, Economic Development UW Extension Committee Report. Mr. Schlender.
On April 11th, one of the things that we need to do is recognize that this is also the UW Extension Agricultural and Economic Development Committee. And so our titles will be updated to represent that, even though that's never been a change. That's just been a point of convenience. The meeting itself, we're still adapting to COVID and try to make sure that we have participation. So there's not been a lot of reports that we're still kind of working through that. The one report that I'd like to share is the Surrey County LCO Economic Development Corporation has been highly active during this pandemic and has been providing webinars and providing assistance to the county. They've held webinars on the PPP, which is that payroll protection program that came out of the CARES Act, and provided assistance to different local businesses to get that loan application through. As everyone may or may not know, the SBA is a federal agency that was charged with working with local banks to put that together. They were inundated and swamped, and they literally broke in half. And but Sawyer County was really on top of it, and I think that our success can be linked to the efforts that this Economic Development Corporation that we support in conjunction with the tribe was instrumental in doing that. They're also working on, they put on, I'd have to say there's at least 16 or 17 different webinars that they've offered and had participation in the county in terms of providing assistance to businesses on, you know, what a reopen would look like, what the different interpretation of the policies, the rhetoric that's been coming from the partisan discussions of this pandemic, helping the businesses to, I guess, operate. So I just want that to be recognized, because sometimes their work goes unrecognized, and we need to make sure that that gets done. That concludes the report.
Mr. Helwig.
Mr. Schluter, I don't know if this would go to you or,
Schluter's
but
over there.
do you know if the Economic Development Corporation has a grant writer?
Mr. Morgan's better.
Would you like to answer that? I didn't hear, has a what?
Grant writer?
No. But.
I mean, having said no, they don't have an official on the payroll or on-call grant writer, but a number of the board members are experienced grant writers. As a matter of fact, the Economic Development Corporation was successful. I think we talked about that last month or the month before, in writing a grant to the Public Service Commission to get $41,000 to bring high-speed internet to the New Berkey facility on 00.
Wonderful.
Thank you for that reminder. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Helwig. Thank you, Mr. Schleiner. All right, any other questions for economic development? I just want to mention that I attended the ribbon cutting on the opening of Main Street the other day. That was a wonderful event. A lot of people were there, and it was, it looks beautiful, I gotta say. All right, moving on then to number 12, Zoning Committee Chair Report. Mr. Buckles.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Last Friday, we had our first public hearing meeting. Haven't had them for 2 months, and it went pretty good. And Jay thought it went pretty good, and I agree with him. The zoning administrator has been getting existing and new committee members additional training information. Permits from the zoning department were down a little for the first quarter of the year, but as the date, sanitary permits are up 18 over last year, and the same time, and land use permits are the same as last year. And continuing to work on other ordinance and amendments, which hopefully the county board will see over the next few months. And I'd like to make one other comment on this. As for our rezones and our CUPs that we do in our public hearings, we have court counsel that is there for these meetings. And that's what keeps us within the legality of the law to make sure we're going in the right direction with this. That's it.
I appreciate that.
You bet.
Okay, Jay, if you want to come up, we have a few action items here. Is it actually 2 items, Jay, we need to act on?
There is, yes.
Okay, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, first one is the rezone case 20-003 for John and Marcus Armstrong, parcel 026-939-153101. It's 20 total acres, zoned residential recreational 1. The request is to rezone that 20 acres from RR1 to commercial 1. As per the applicant's statement, this would be to maximize the economic potential of the parcel by expanding an existing small business in the area. The land has already been logged and expunged of its resources. Rezoning this land would allow the applicant to expand a dock and lift business to include boat storage and retail sales for docks, lifts, and water accessories. Christmas trees would be planted to revive the ecosystem. They had also expressed at the time of the meeting that they were looking into doing Christmas tree sales sometime down the future. The proposed rezone would result in conforming lot dimensional requirements. The purpose of this request would then have for a permitted use per that commercial 1 zone district. The nearest C1 zone property in relation to this is an adjacent portion that is to the southwest of the parcel. And if you want to scroll, Alex, you can go to some of those maps. The southwest portion is along the Highway 70 corridor. This property is actually on Highway E and Highway 70. It's actually about a quarter mile in on Highway E as you're kind of heading out towards Whitefish. Future land use map for the town of Salmon Lake shows this area as forest residential. The town of Salmon Lake did approve the rezone request on March 20th, stating that it would not create a highway or traffic problem and it would not be damaging to the rights of others. There were 7 opinion letters sent out to the property owners within 300 feet. 5 of those letters were returned, 4 with no objections, 1 with objection, and that was read into the record at the zoning committee public hearing. By action of the zoning committee public hearing, motion was approved on May 15th, 2020 to recommend approval to the county board by a vote of 5-0 with the findings of facts that it would not be damaging to the rights of others' property values and it would not be detrimental to ecology, wildlife, or wetlands.
Mr. Helwig,
Make a motion approved.
for the reason. Mr. Buckholz?
I'll second that.
Okay, I got a motion by Mr. Helwig, second by Mr. Buckholz to approve rezone number 20-003 and the resolution to amend the Surrey County zoning map. Is there any further discussion? Mr. Olson?
My only discussion was, under the summary of the request, it states that the applicants are requesting to conditionally rezone 20 acres, and Sawyer County does not want to get into the business of conditionally rezoning it. The other reason I had my light on was to make that motion.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Olson. Okay, motion by Mr. Helwig, second by Mr. Buckholz to approve the rezone. Is there any further discussion? If none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. All right, Jay, number B12B.
Yes, rezone case 20-004, owner Buff Creek Concepts, agent Shad Strom, parcel 010-841-283403, 5.0 total acres, zoned agricultural 1. The request is rezoned to 5.03 acres from A1 to commercial 1, C1. As per the applicant's statement, this would be for the relocation of a construction company, Buff Creek Concepts, Inc., as well as a potential retail shop. The proposed rezone would result in conforming lot dimensional requirements. This would also then be a permitted use per that C1 zone district for a construction company doing business at that location. The applicant has expressed that he would also be interested in doing a retail shop in the future, as that would also be a permitted use in the C1 zone district. The nearest C1 zone property in relation to this is immediately adjacent to the west. There's actually a larger block of commercial right there. This is along the Highway B and Highway K corridor. And if you scroll down just a little bit further, sorry about the orientation of the map, it's landscaped, and I'll try to clean those up so we can look at north-south here. But if you tilt your head to the south is actually the LCO Casino, so that'll give you the reference as to where this parcel is. The USDA web soil survey does show this is prime farmland area, but it is a completely and wooded lot at this point. The future land use map for the town of Hayward shows this area as rural transitional, RT. This is defined as an area where if the town determines that the rezone classification is appropriate for a more intense development, they see that as a future land use, and that a commercial zone district would be kind of the same feel as a more intense type of development pattern continues. The town of Hayward did approve the rezone request on April 17, 2020, stating that it would not be damaging to the rights of others. 4 opinion letters sent out to owners within 300 feet. 1 of those was returned and with no objections as read into record. At the Surrey County Zoning Public Hearing meeting on May 15, 2020, it was recommended for approval to the county board by a vote of 5-0. Findings of facts is determined it would not be damaging to the rights of property values of others. It would be consistent with the town of Hayward comprehensive plan. That is all.
Mr. Olson?
So we have to visit Ms. Zilmer's question about why there isn't a 30-day waiting period as there has been historically.
Okay, do you want to answer that, Jay? Or is
I would defer that question to legal counsel.
okay,
If
is
she is
Rebecca
available.
on, Tom?
She's on the line.
Okay,
Do you need to unmute or did
I do,
she do
yep.
that?
And Ms. Olson, I'll be repeat that, okay? When I get her. Are you there, Rebecca?
I am. If you could please repeat the question, that would be great.
You bet, Mr. Olson.
Sure. The question was, generally in a rezone or even a conditional use, in order to appease the appeal period of 30 days for neighboring property owners, we have to wait a month between the zoning committee's recommendation and the county board decision. In this case, we are looking at a May 15th zoning committee recommendation and a May 21st county board decision. I'd like to know why we are waiving that time period as we've done historically.
Rebecca?
Yep. Are you referring, Mr. Olson, to the restrictions in 5969.5 with respect to the town objections? Because it's my understanding in this case, the town did not disapprove the rezone. And it's under that section that creates a right for the town to file an objection. And then they also have an additional statutory right to file for additional time. But again, the trigger for that is if there is a disapproval at the town level. But it's my understanding that there was an approval at the town level.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
ahead, Mr. Olson.
Ms. Roker, I believe in the preliminaries that are read before every single zoning committee meeting by the chairman, they do say that you do have a right to appeal within 30 days. I don't think that applies just to the property owner or the applicant. That applies to people that are there to testify on behalf or against the applicant. Historically, that's what Sawyer County has always done. I'm not saying that's particularly right or wrong, but it seems to be that that's been the case statewide, where there is a 30-day wait in between the decision of the zoning committee and the county board of supervisors.
Mr.
Well,
Oh,
Let me
just a second, Rebecca.
Let me ask this question. We have a recommendation that's coming from the zoning committee. And the zoning committee is asking for us to approve, what is this amendment?
It would be a zone district change amendment, correct?
And so my question would be, before we go in invoking legal counsel, with respect to Supervisor Olson's question, were the procedures followed at the committee level?
Yes.
Yes.
And
Rebecca was there.
and legal counsel was present for that?
She was on virtual.
So the question, what is the question that we're asking right now, that there's a waiver that's being incorporated, or what? Because we don't have a question in front of us. What we have is a response to public comment, and we have supervisors are not supposed to respond to the public comment. Public comment's a chance to address the board. And so I think that we're making this too complicated. I think if we have an amendment for it, let the board vote on it. And if it supports it, then goes forward, then that's another action. If there's nothing in the lower committee that shows that there's any negative action, there's nothing to appeal. You can't appeal a decision that you agree with. And you don't have 30 days to agree to something that's already there. You're not going to say, well, I really want to vote against it because they all agreed with me. That's not a basis of an appeal. And that's what Rebecca is about to get into. And I think we're going to waste a lot of time getting back to what we really should be doing, is voting on this motion.
Right. And I would entertain a motion to approve the zoning amendment request. Mr. Helwig.
Do that motion.
Okay, Ms. Dennis?
Second.
Okay, motion by Mr. Helwig, second by Ms. Dennis, to approve the zoning amendment request number 20-004. I think we're good. Is there any further discussion? If none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Opposed? Motion carries. Yes, sir, Mr. Buckles.
I would like to have heard Rebecca's comment on that.
Okay.
I mean, that's up to you, your board chair, but whatever.
Okay.
It's your report, though, so you can never address
Would you like her to comment?
Yes.
Rebecca, can you comment on this, please, before we move on to the next? We've already
Yes.
approved the amendment, though.
Yes, briefly, with respect to the procedural process, there are certain actions that one may think have a 30-day appeal period, but there aren't. You can't appeal a rezone to the Board of Appeals. A rezone goes directly to the circuit court if you are an aggrieved party, and that is under a writ of certiorari, and that is under a different statutory section. And I'm not sure that if that's where the question is generating from, but my understanding of the question, and with respect to the timeframes, the root of the question is whether the town disapproved the recommended the rezone, and here we have an approval, and so the time restrictions set forth in 5969 sub 5 would not apply, again, because we had a disapproval at the town level. And I did virtually attend that zoning meeting, and I'm confident that the proper procedures were complied with.
Okay. Moving on then, number 13. Thank you, Ron. Public Safety Committee Chair Report. Mr. Schlender.
Public Safety met on May 7th. Again, dealing with the virtual, the new normal. Of the reports that we received, the jail is still full, and we definitely need to have some kind of discussion about what we can do to alleviate that. I want to recognize the work of the jailers and our law enforcement in dealing with these unprecedented COVID situation in terms of trying to alleviate and protect their staff. Of the positives, none of them have arisen from our jail staff or from anybody that's been, I guess, incarcerated. Second thing I wanted to bring to the board's attention is for the next month's meeting, because of the fact that we had kind of disruption in a flow and work, the committee is retaking up the issue with bus safety. We had a lot of concerns and a lot of issues that were brought to the attention of public safety back in January. We had an unfortunate incident where someone was arrested and charged out for for her conduct, where she struck a student that was getting on the bus. And so people have been, as we kind of get back to the new normal, we want that to come back. And what we're going to do is we're going to develop a plan to address what are the hot zones and develop something with local law enforcement so that we can get better eyes on things, so that we can ensure the safety, and then also recognize the work that the bus drivers are doing and the busing companies. And so we're going to work on doing that, because there's some frustration with the statutory requirements of reporting, the charging document that has to go in place. There was just a lot of different things that had never really been brought to light before. And so we're taking that back up again. And then, of course, the last one is, do we have that on here, or is it separate for the CJCC? CJCC is somewhere in there.
Yep.
We're trying to establish, we have not been able to meet because of the COVID, and then we're also having a difficulty time getting a quorum. Working with Mr. Hoff to address that and getting participation. I don't think it's a lack of interest. I just think it's been, other things have been catching more attention than being able to catch a CJCC meeting. A couple things that were approved and that are waiting final ratification is we're increasing the public participation. We're going to be receiving applications for two at-large appointments from citizens in the county. And then we're also just clarifying the bylaws in terms of, and I hate that because you say bylaws and CJCC and the people just start twitching. So we're actually moving forward and trying to getting things caught up. I don't know if it's been made public knowledge, but we will have some staffing changes that we need to address probably in the next couple of months. And that concludes the report, Mr. Chairman.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Schlender. Did I see a recent email from our judge that we're gonna start the bail bond testing again soon? Is that like next week? I know we had put it off during this.
We just had I don't know specifically what the plan is for the bail bond. I do know that there has been some changes. That just came on by itself. So I just say that with this COVID situation, I don't think that we're in we're in the safe zone yet. And so exposing health professionals for people who are bail bond testing, which is trying to alleviate the jail population, it creates another layer of concern and increases the likelihood of any kind of transmission among people who may or may not have this. So the short answer is I don't know.
Okay.
The long answer is we want to maintain that. And that is definitely one of the things that we need to maintain, and that requires a conversation with the tribe as well as the county.
Thank you, Mr. Linder. Okay, anything? If not, then we'll move on to number 14, Public Works Committee Chair Report. Mr. Kinsley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We listened to the airport because of the Cobalt-19 has received some more funding, which we had to spend within a certain amount of time. Our administrator and staff helped take care of that. The airport flights going in and out are also down because of Cobalt-19. Then we had the highway department, and Gary Gephardt was there. He explained to us how shortcomings in funding and workers is not helping take care of all our public roads. And the last thing is we had maintenance explain how they're trying to work with Cobalt-19, and which led into Mr. John Kane of Venture Architects brought us a plan, many plans for a second option, which we all have a book for. That completes my report unless someone else has a question. Thank you.
Yes. Any comments, concerns for Mr. Kinsley, Public Works? Thank you. All right, then moving on to number 15, Finance Committee Chair Report. Mr. Paulson.
Mr. Chairman, as we had a lengthy agenda, we started a half an hour early. The primary topics of discussion were the second large courtroom, the referendum, and actually postponing the collection of the July property taxes to October. I'll take them separately. The second large courtroom, not everybody on the committee had the opinion that we needed a second large courtroom, but we have been at this for what, 3 months, 6 months, a year, 2 years, and we need, and my fellow board members, we need to make a decision. We need to move on, and I encourage us all to make a decision. We can what if this until 2024, and we still won't have anything. The other item was referendum. We put in the packet something you've seen before. It's a general discussion of the referendum. The committee agreed that the county administrator would come forward with a recommendation that we place a referendum to exceed the levy limits on the November ballot. He will be bringing forward a dollar amount. In addition, there'll be at the June meeting, we'll be reviewing the resolutions, the 2 resolutions to put the referendum on the ballot. And then the third item is in the Finance Committee packet, there was a lot of documents and data about postponing the collection of the July property taxes until October without penalties and interest. And some of the reasons, and we accepted the county administrator and treasurer's recommendation that we not postpone collection of the July property taxes. A number of reasons, but a couple highlights is that the county belongs to a 4-county consortium. If we changed and postponed collection of the property taxes, we would have to reprogram the software, and it looks like we would be the one on the hooks to reprogram the software. Second item is the school districts. They depend on their money, I think in September, and if we delay collection of property taxes, they're going to be short of the money that they expect to happen. And maybe Mr. Hoff, if he wants to amplify something, but that's the reason we did not approve postponing the sale or the collection of property taxes until October.
Yeah, I can chime in on that.
Sure.
We did have a lot of conversations with WCA and other counties regarding that legislation. it was well-intentioned by the legislature to attempt to give a break on the due date for the property tax, but the way the legislation was written was poorly drafted in the sense that it required the county to settle on August 20th for the amount collected, and then in September 20th to settle in full. But the due date for the taxes would be October 1st. So there was a cash flow issue with the way that the legislation was proposed and set up. Another issue was, as was mentioned, the software issue and those sorts of things. But Wisconsin Counties Association did have their say at the hearing on that to get in the legislation that the counties would have the first option of passing the resolution to adopt that. Originally in the legislation, it was just going to be up to the towns and cities, but it's the counties that get left holding the bag with that change. The other issue was that the taxes, the due date technically didn't change, but the allowance of not doing penalties and interest was waived, but the due date was still July 31st, or so you would still get they would still be delinquent, but you wouldn't pay the penalty and interest. So it's, again, just the way the legislation was poorly drafted. Only 4 counties have adopted that legislation so far. Barron County was one of them. Their difference, though, was they have an April due date as well. So they had to pass that just about after that legislation came through, just because they had an extra payment date in there that they had to adopt that before that April due date for them. But we don't have that in Sawyer County. So that allowed us time to reconsider and bring that forward. Thank you.
Mr. Helwig. Thank you, Tom.
I just want to reiterate the fact, when we're talking about getting the courtroom going, got to get it done and all that. Like I said, I've said it many times. Seems like everyone stops at that in that thing that is told to us as far as getting it going. There's that or. It says we have to, as long as we're in the process of. It doesn't say we have to have it built by 2023. It says we have to be in the process of. Read it. Mr. Morgan, if you don't believe me, read it.
Thank you,
It
Mr.
says,
Helwig.
one more thing.
Yes, sir.
And far as, we've worked on this for a long time. It's just, the thing was, we started talking about, it got dropped, and we're just recently really actually talking about it. It might seem like it's been a long time, but it's hard actually digging in and doing it. It's only recently.
Great. Mr. Paulson, can you please comment on the referendum that we're looking at? Is this to exceed the levy limits for a projected budgeted shortfall in 2021? Or would it also include operation of a second courtroom? Have you been that far yet, or what are we looking at with this referendum?
Okay. The second courtroom and the second judge is not in the referendum that we're considering. Based on the projections, 2021, we would have a budget deficit of $900,000 before the second large courtroom and the second judge, and that deficit goes up to 2 million something by the end of 2025.
Okay. So can you also explain to the board, how would we fund the construction of one of these options? If we were to choose it in June, how would you push us to fund that?
The funding for the second large courtroom addition would be bonded. It would be a debt which would be outside the levy limits, and we would be able to raise taxes to fund the debt. Just a rough number, if you assume a $5 million project, interest rates at 3-4%, that would mean property taxes would go up about $8 per 100,000 of valuation. But it possibly could go down because interest rates are pretty close to zero now.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna ask too.
Okay,
We're at a good time to borrow money.
yes.
There was-
And to address Mr. Howig's question, the sooner we get the second courtroom up and running, the more time we have to determine whether or not we need a second judge. According to the 10th District Administrator, there are more judges available than we have space. If we had a second large courtroom, they would allocate, or actually visiting judges could handle a number of our cases. If we can reduce the current judge's caseload by visiting judges, we may not need a second judge. The second judge would be permanent, and it would cost an additional amount for staff support. I've seen numbers from $150,000 to $350,000.
Mr. Helwig.
Just to let you know, I am for the second judge and everything, just that we make sure we take it, we do the building correctly. Mr. Paulson, that levy, does that continue on, or is that just for 21, or how's that work?
If you're funding debt, that levy would continue until the debt's paid off. And the number I quoted anticipated a 20-year debt.
Mr. Betcher.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I apologize for not having all the backstory on this as a new member, but has this board already voted? Have we already decided that we do in fact want another courthouse, and now we're just deciding on which one, or where are we in the process on that, Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Hoff, I'm gonna let you answer that.
Previously, in November of 17, I believe was the date, the board passed a resolution supporting the idea of a second circuit court within Sawyer County. One of the requirements of getting an additional circuit court would be the facilities. So it's the timing of when we would get a circuit court, and we are slated to be in that third wave for circuit courts around the state for 3 years. We would be in that third wave. One of the considerations is, do we have a facility ready or in the making?
Okay, so it sounds like we know we need a second courtroom, and now we're just deciding on the options 1 through 8B. So is this only in the finance committee? Are they making or is it in another committee as well?
No, it goes through Public Works, Public Safety, and Finance. And when we look at all the options tonight, Mr. Betcher, it's going to go back to those committees. It's also going to go to Admin Committee. And I would expect that we can make a decision in June, once everybody gets a look at this.
Okay, thank you,
Which
Mr.
option to
Chairman.
go with? Yep. Mr. Schlender.
So this issue has been it's been discussed ad nauseum to the limits of ad nauseum. The concern, how do I say this? So the reason why this is confusing is because of the 15 people that need to make this decision, we all have 15 separate opinions about what this is. And so we phrase it in a way that supports our argument. What we do have is we have a constitutional responsibility to provide for people who violate the law, who have been cited for the law, an opportunity to have their day in court, to be treated fairly, and in light of all of this discussion about constitutional rights, this idea about masking and this idea about power and responsibility of government, we the people of that Constitution that's hanging in the wall right there have a duty to make sure that people are treated fairly if they're rightfully or wrongfully accused. And so in order to do that, we need to have the facilities to be able to do that. We already have a circuit court. There's a circuit court here. What we're asking for is a second branch of that to alleviate the pressure that the current judge has right now. And the current judge has, and this has been in the discussions that we've had, something like 4,000 hearings a year. And so someone who's faced with a charge of driving, speeding, sexual molestation, assault, murder, all have the same amount of time that they get in front of the judge to face their accuser, to exercise their constitutional rights. And if you have 4,000 hearings, then we're giving them lip service. We're saying you have that right to an attorney, you have a right to a fair and speedy trial, you have a right, to these things that were, valued to us in the Constitution, but they have it in 15 seconds. They have it in a minute. And if you think that we can't decide something over the course of 2 years, let someone who's facing a life-changing decision have that time in 30 seconds or an hour or whatever that they're going to do. And so we have conflated this issue. We have three things. One is we have an epidemic that's impacting the county, and it's not the pandemic that we're dealing. We're talking about drugs and alcohol, and so that creates one issue. Then we have a public safety issue about making sure that the judge has the tools that that person has, because they're the sole protector of the Constitution when they come in this courtroom. That's it. Lawyers represent the issues. Law enforcement have a duty to bring that law issue, bring it forward for the safety, and then we as the citizens are supposed to benefit from that. But we're handcuffing it because we're putting it all through one person. So if we had this hourglass and everybody's accused at the top of the hourglass, it comes through that little bitty thing right there. And then, once that's adjudicated, then it goes through the next step, right? Well, then we talk about the dollars and the money. And so then we say, well, on TV, hearings last all, 15 minutes until we go to commercial break. But I'm telling you that in order for you to have access, we have a second courtroom that they say over there that's in there, but you have a jury responsibility. You also have, the responsibility of providing for a recording system, and there's different things that go to the operation of a court, and we're not paying attention to that. We're more worried about the millions or whatever. And so we need a second courtroom so that we can have a better facility going forward, because this was built in 1960. And so we're dealing with COVID-19 stuff, and we're going to put more people in this building to, in support of their rights. So we need that second courtroom. We need that second judge in order to properly handle the cases that are going forward. And we need a commitment, because it's going to cost money, about how to do that. It's not anything other than that. If you hear an argument that says, well, if we can get a judge, but we don't need the courtroom, or we need a courtroom, but maybe not the judge, then what you're hearing is a political rhetoric, article, or partisan kind of inflection of what their view is on what the issue that's in front of us. And this board in 2017 made a commitment to uphold the rights that we have under the Constitution by making sure that the caseload that was provided by the court administrator to show the Surrey County citizens, the ones that were participating in the courtroom, they were going to be treated with respect, and we were going to support that. We supported that. We took an action as a body and voted on that.
We did. We passed it. I got to go.
So that's it.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Helwig?
I guess Mr. Slender did not hear anything at all what I said earlier about how much we've discussed the courtroom itself. But you used the word responsible numerous times in your rant. Now,
Mr. Helwig, keep it
to
us, okay? Don't focus on
it really
another
was.
supervisor.
We also have to be financially responsible. I understand we need this courtroom, the judge, all that. And I understand why. And, at the same time, I don't know where you bring this political stuff in.
Mark,
I'm done.
Thank you. Okay. Are there any other questions, concerns for Mr. Paulson and the Finance Committee report? Good. Okay, thank you. All right, moving on then to number 16, Mr. John Kane, Venture Architects, options for a Second Circuit courtroom. And this is, as I mentioned earlier, this is discussion only, but I would expect it to go back to these committees I mentioned, and that at our June meeting, we are ready to make a decision. Yep, it's going to go to Public Safety, Public Works, Finance, CJCC will discuss it, and Admin. And when we get through all those committees and come to the June County Board meeting, I'm going to lock the door until we make a decision. All right, Mr. Hoff and Mr. Kane,
I'm on the call.
Second
Tom, do you want to
Courtroom.
offer any introductions? Tom?
Yeah, just as way of introduction, the last time we met, we did talk about where we're at with the courthouse construction planning phase. Remember that we went through this exercise last fall and came up with 3 solutions for a second courtroom that would exist as additions to this building. The board since then opted to look at other options to possibly build that second courtroom within the footprint of the existing courthouse. And so the information that you saw last time and this time incorporate those other options into the plan with the financial considerations outlined as well. So Mr. Kane has put together this presentation, and we can walk through that and see what questions may arise out of that.
Okay, thank you very much. Are you able to hear me clearly?
We are. Thank you, Mr. Kane. Appreciate it.
Okay. So Tom, you're going to apologize. You're going to be serving as Vanna White this evening. So if you could take us to the next slide. And thank you again for inviting us to work with you on this project. I know it's extremely important for the county. Tom, can you? Okay, so briefly, there are about 50 slides in this. Do the supervisors have a hard copy of this with them, or are they just going to be looking at the screen?
We all have one. We all have one, John.
Okay, perfect. I think what I would like to do in the interest of time would like to just motor through the whole presentation, unless there's a really burning question that someone might have, and then we can go back into the options, if you will. The pages are numbered, so I can do that pretty quickly. So as Tom mentioned, last year we developed schemes 1 through 3. And at your direction and guidance, we've come up with quite a number of other options here that we're going to present this evening, both in concept as well as the budget. So, Tom, if you can go to the next slide. Slide 3. I believe we have on the call representatives from Market & Johnson. I don't know, Jason, Dean, are either of you able to make the call this evening? They're out of Eau Claire.
Yes, this is Dean from Market & Johnson. I apologize, I don't have a camera on my computer, but I'm here. I don't think Jason got on, though.
I think you're right. So as part of our contract with Surrey County, we retain Market & Johnson out of Eau Claire. They've done a lot of work in your area, including work for the county, to assist us in doing cost estimating, a high-level estimate, if you will. And they did the work this last year as well. So when we talk about the budget development later on for each of the options, I'm going to share with you their budget estimate for the construction costs, what I call the bricks and mortar. I'm going to add to each of these, and it's perhaps at a higher than it might need to be, 20% for other additional non-construction costs. It's a long list of possibilities. I doubt that you'd need the 20%, but it's just a placeholder for now. We'll talk also this evening that many of the options affect existing areas. We have not attempted to try to price out what those costs might be it either remodeling or perhaps having to lease space off campus. So let's go then to the next slide, slide 4, Tom. So very briefly, some of the design considerations and work that we've done, I want to bring you up to date, some conversations we've had with some important people that will be involved in this project. The SCR is the Wisconsin Supreme Court Rule 68. It guides and provides guidelines with respect to courthouse design, security, facilities, and staffing. We work with your district court administrator, who was mentioned briefly earlier on this evening. His name is Chris Channing. He's out of Hudson, Wisconsin. He's the 10th Judicial District Administrator. I had a pleasant conversation with him this week, brought him up to speed with all of the options. The things that I would have been concerned about, or still am, the three-way separation, which I'll explain this evening in the slides for the public, the secure, meaning the judge and his staff, and then restricted would be the offenders Chris was somewhat flexible when it came to the discussion about restricted, and I'll explain that more when we get to some of the options. I was also concerned about room sizes because SCR 68 has some pretty stringent requirements in terms of the courtroom at 2,000 square feet and the judge's chamber at 500. But Chris has agreed that we can use, for the new courtroom, we'll use existing sizes. So the new courtroom will be the same size as your current one. The judge's chamber will be the same. The future judge's chamber will be the same as the current one. So that's the district court administrator. Phasing of the project will be a consideration with some of the options because there's relocation. I noted that a moment ago. A few of them will strongly and quite likely have to relocate the clerk of court function. And I think that's something we want to be keeping in mind. That's an essential piece of the judiciary. And then finally, the code review and the fire separation. So let's then go, Tom, to the next slide 5. So you have in your community Eric Hansen. He is with the Wisconsin Department Safety and Professional Services. He's quite familiar with the building. In fact, I believe he actually worked in the building at one time. I want, with his permission, I want to dispel, if you will, a thought or a concern that was expressed at one of the meetings that the work that's being proposed here would require the entire building to be fire sprinklered. That is not a true statement. We are able, and we talked through the designs, the ability to separate new construction with firewalls that would then eliminate the need for fire sprinklering of the entire building. We would sprinkler the areas that are affected with the project. And so I just want to make that point very clear. And in fact, you have experienced the fire separation when, I believe in the early 1990s, the HHS and the child support additions were constructed. Eric looks forward to working with us as the project proceeds. So just a little more background on what's called this fire separation. Tom, if you can go to slide 6. And I'm going to use simply what you are familiar with as Scheme 1. The beige color is the existing courthouse. The new would be that courtroom addition. To avoid the fire sprinklering, a fire separation is created. It's either a 1 or 2 hour wall of construction. It's very, very conventional. It happens all the time on projects. If you can then go to slide 7, we have kind of a diagram of what that might be. So wherever the new addition would be, there would be this fire separation separating the new construction from the remodeled portion. So that's a little bit of a diagram in that regard. Tom, let's go to slide 8. This is a useful diagram because it summarizes or outlines all the different areas that we've looked at. And I think if I look at the various wings of the building, I think we've pretty much exhausted all the reasonable possibilities that might exist in terms of trying to reuse portions of this existing building. So 1 and 2, and we're going to go through each one of these very briefly with some budget information. And I might mention, you probably already looked at the last pages of the report. We summarize all the budget information on that last page. And more importantly, we provide a slide that provides a hierarchy of the least cost to the most cost. I think that'll be very helpful for you as you make a decision. But 1 and 2 and 3 were last summer. Slides 4 are options 4A and B. Address options where the Register of Deeds, Treasurer, and County Clerk are located. 5 is a brand new single-story building to the west or to the left of zoning. 6 is complete reuse of a portion, either the upper floor or lower floor of HHS. The 7A, 7B, 8A, and 8B are options that address areas where you have the assembly room, clerk of courts, etc. So let me go through them. Am I going at a reasonable pace?
Yeah, real good.
Okay. So, Tom, we're on to slide 10. We're 20% of the way through. So let's go to slide 10. So this is from last year. This is what we call Scheme 1. The white colored areas represent the existing building. What I guess I would call the salmon colored area is where the assembly room, the clerk of court, etc. is. The yellow would be the new design. The red dashed lines discuss that movement of prisoners from the jail across the street through a garage into the 2 courtrooms. So let me then go to the next slide. Slide 11. Not to necessarily get into great detail here, but the courtroom is the blue. The area where the offenders are kept, the garage, the holding cells, etc., are the green. You'll see with the green arrows that there's direct separate movement from the offenders into the courtrooms, both the existing and the proposed. The pink is the jury deliberation. The other sort of salmon pink color is the judge in their chambers. There are court commissioners in the turquoise, and then there's some bathrooms labeled 313. I should note that in the options that we look at this evening, there are clearly some apples and oranges. And what I mean by that is schemes 1 and 2 meet all the space requirements that were discussed and agreed upon last summer with staff. And in that discussion, it also included an additional assembly room, the 1,030, and then a larger, more functional secure lobby, which you can see in the diagram as well, and as well as an extension of the hallway. So just factually, those are elements that you will not see in the new solutions that we'll discuss this evening. Let's go to the next slide. So this will be your first budget slide. The construction cost has been provided by Market & Johnson. You can read the numbers. The 20% that I mentioned earlier gets us to a total project cost range of roughly 4.3 to 4.6 million. That's project cost. In our conversations, in our work, that would be the number that we would take to the county board for funding approval. This project also does not require any displacement of departments, so there's no cost to that. Let's then go to scheme 2, which is page 13. This scheme is essentially identical to scheme 1. It's just the placement of the building, and perhaps most important is a dislocation of more parking. Tom, I forgot to ask, do the supervisors have your handout with respect to employee parking space displacement?
They do, yes.
Okay, so I apologize. I guess I could be covering those numbers at the same time. Scheme 1, no employee relocation, but we lose 19 spaces. In this scheme 2, the fallback on this one is we're losing more parking, up to 26. So Tom, if you go to slide 14, it's going to be the same identical plan. All that we're doing is moving the building to the right, to the east, so that we can create this 30-foot wide courtyard, if you will, and then that eliminates that fire separation and then still maintains the windows that are in the room that you're currently in, the courthouse. When we get to the prices, you'll see on slide 15 that it's essentially the same price. Really, no. I mean, there was a slight difference, but it's negligible. So they're both the same, and of course, with new construction, they will be the most expensive. Let's then go to the next slide, 16. This is perhaps more anecdotal because I don't think this is even close to being on the table, but this was a study to explore the possibility of building a new courthouse, if you will, as a direct connection to the jail. But you'll see that when we get to the next slide, slide 17, the price tag for this is considerably higher than anything that we'll be talking about this evening. So then let's go to slide 18, and then we're going to start the new options. So I think you see where we're at. This is kind of I guess I call it the west side of the building. Scheme 4A is going to build a courtroom and judge suite addition off of this existing building, the stone wall, just to the left of the main entrance. Let's go to the next slide, Tom. Slide 20. And so at a very high level, what you'll see is that the addition is green, the 2,800 square feet. The remodeled area where those existing departments are is completely gutted and remodeled. There is the 1780 addition, which will serve as the garage, some offender holding rooms that are required as part of the Sally Port. And then there are 2 sets of non-contact visiting booths. This would be where an attorney could help serve the needs of their client prior to going into court. It's something that should be part of a facility such as this. So go then to the next slide and we can look at a little more detail, though I will say that in all of these options, you're looking really at a diagram. It's not a floor plan. We have tried to provide enough gray space, if you will, for circulation, et cetera. But as the project would proceed and you select one of these options, the next step would be to develop a more detailed floor plan. But you'll see, kind of as I was discussing, the judge and the court are to the left in the addition. The remodeling, I should mention that in this wing of the building, we have some interesting existing conditions, if you will. The red lines represent vaults in the building, and those vaults and their roof construction actually hold up the roof. So we're not going to take those down. We can cut holes into them, and I think the plan here is an attempt to try to see how we can take some of the functions and put them into those particular rooms. I won't go particularly into the details, but I think it's working fairly well. The green area to the right, you'll see, as I noted, was where the garage and the holding cells, et cetera. The existing courtroom is to the right. The Dom A is, at least at that time last year, was a domestic abuse, if they're still in that position. All of the arrows, as you can see, they're arrows that go from the lobby for the public into the gallery, the judge from their chamber, the jury from their deliberation room. The arrow that's more problematic for me in particular in this option is the arrow that's going from the garage where the inmates are. And you can see the path that they would have to take through the staff area to get to the courtroom one way or another. I think that's a challenge in this particular option, if I might suggest that. Let's go then to the budget. 22, 3.2 to 3.48 project cost. And again, the relocation of those departments, where they're to be located and their cost is still to be determined, but it would be a cost of some sort. Let's go to 4B. This is going to be slide 23. This is the courtyard between the county clerk and the judge and the courtroom where you're all in. So we'd be filling that in. Some issues with constructability. Tom, just go back just very briefly. Anything can get built, and this can certainly be built, but you can see that in placing this courtroom in between these walls, and it will fit, there's going to be extensive amount of reworking of the roof lines, et cetera. The courtroom will be quite a bit higher than the soffit that you see on the existing building. So Markin & Johnson has taken that into account when they do their costing. So let's go then, Tom, to 24. And you'll see the addition will be where the courtroom is. I apologize. Yes, that's the courtroom. And the inmates, and then the remodeled will be the judge and the jury. So then let's go to slide 25. And there's a better detail description of that. So the green would be where the inmates are coming from. I apologize. We should probably have another arrow from the green area to go into the existing courtroom to the right. This is an option that clearly provides that three-way separation where the public is coming off the lobby, the jury and the judge are coming from the one side, and the inmates are coming from the north. This is a very workable option. So then let's look at slide 26. And the price tag is what, roughly 2.5 to 2.7 project cost. Again, there's displacement of departments. Let's go to 5. That's slide 27. So in this portion of the building, we're going to add a 1-story structure just to the north of HHS. I should note also from the slide, you can see that the HHS building has a basement, and there is quite a slope from the entrance of the courthouse down to that lower level, if you will. There would need to be some considerations if this option were taken. Do you build a basement? I mean, you're almost 20%, 30% of the cost of the basement by just the foundation work, et cetera, and all the fill that would have to be created if you did not build a basement. Bit of a detail, but it's something that one would want to think about. I believe in our pricing, we did not put the basement in, if I recall correctly. So then let's go to the next slide, 28. And you'll see the addition, the 4,800 square feet. And you'll see also the 1,200 square foot addition, and that is where the garage and the inmate holding areas are. So when we go to the next slide, 29, as I mentioned that earlier on in the presentation, that there are some places, this is clearly one of them, where offenders would be afforded the opportunity to walk through the lobby space to get to the courtroom. So we're not meeting that 3-way separation. Our district court administrator seemed very, I wouldn't use the word comfortable, but he said if this were an option to take, he would understand the circumstances of its design. So this is really all new construction, 1 story, plus then the sally port, et cetera. Let's go then to slide 30. And this will be 2.8 to 3.0. You're going to see here that there are a lot of options, not this particular one, but a lot of the other ones are all kind of clustered in roughly about the same price, same amount of addition, same amount of remodeling. Let me then go to slide 31. This is where there is no new construction here. We're simply taking half to 2/3 of either the upper floor or the lower floor of HHS, completely gutting it and remodeling it. This one, perhaps because of the existing building and the fact that it's less than 50% of the building might, well, I apologize. We do have a firewall that separates this wing from the rest of the building. I do think, though, that 50% of, or rather the construction we're talking about is less than 50%. So I don't know if we would have to sprinkle this. But truthfully, sprinklering is $2, $3 a square foot. It's important, it's money, but that's something that we would work out with Eric, the code official. Let's go to slide 32, Tom, and you'll see just kind of a general layout of that plan. This one, likewise, the question is, how do we move offenders to the courtroom? We've got a couple options. We've budgeted for a garage in the location that we've shared with you in the other options. Another option would be to drive the offender around to the south side of the building and bring them up. It's a half level, bring them up through that elevator into the courtroom. But in both cases, the offender is kind of out in the public, if you will. So let's look at the price tag for that. And that's slide 33. This is one of the lesser expensive options because there's no new construction. So it's in the low 2 millions. Let's go then to slide 34. This is an interesting one. I will tell you that the courtroom does not fit in this courtyard. We could shoehorn one in, but I really strongly believe that if we're running in this orientation, we would really compromise the functionality of the courtroom. But we're showing it anyway, and we priced it out. So let's go to 35. 7A actually will show you the new addition in the courtyard and then the remodeled areas. There is also that garage or sally port across the hallway. Let's then go to the next slide, 36. So in an effort to try to provide the appropriate shape and proportion of the courtroom, we're actually rotating the courtroom 90 degrees so that part of it is in what you would call the assembly room, and then the rest of it goes into the infilled courtyard. I think there might be some constructability issues with this where we're remodeling and we're building spaces that abut both or bridge both the new and the existing. You can see the arrows, the jury, the judge, the inmates coming from across the hallway. The public is coming down a separate hallway. So you'll see that in this option, not only are we dislocating or displacing the functions that are to the west where the judge and the jury would be, but we're also losing the assembly room, which I know there's very limited conference space in the existing courthouse. So then let's go to slide 37, 2.8 to 3 million. Let's then go to 7B. This is where, so you're accustomed to the colors, you know what they mean. So let's then go to the next slide. And this is where we're trying to fit that courtroom. And the blue is the courtroom. And I suppose if we're true to ourselves in terms of the proportion of that courtroom, and particularly the width and the need for adequate space in what we call the well of the courtroom in front of the judge, the jury box, etc., we might in fact impede on the existing building. So I think there's some functionality, some construction limitations on this one. I strongly think this doesn't work, if I can be so direct, but it's worth having studied. So let's go to the price for that, 2.7 to 2.9. So then let's go to 8A. We're coming down the wire here. So 8A attempts or looks at options within the wing of the assembly and the clerk of court. So there is a hallway, if you will. The green allows us to get the public around this suite, if you will, of court functions to get down to the DA and child support at the bottom of that wing. So let's then go to the next slide, 42. And so you'll see that, you know, within the footprint of the building, we're getting all the functions, but then to get ourselves around to where the DA, et cetera, are, we have to find some path, if you will, to get over there. Let's look at the price for that. 2.5 to 2.8. There's a lot of dislocation on that, or just, movement of departments. And then this will be the final option, where we're going to add on to the east side of the building. Oh, I should mention that portion of the roof that's projecting up, that's the firewall that was built between the 1960s building and the 1991. So there's an actual example of that firewall construction. Let's then go to slide 45. And you'll see that in this option, there's a lot of remodeling going on. There's a lot of displacement. And then there's this small, long addition that would be built. And we're going to lose some parking spaces. I believe 12 would be the number. So let's then go to the plan diagram 46, and you'll kind of see how that lays out. So it's kind of self-explanatory. Then 47 would be the budget numbers. Again, you're seeing numbers that are very similar to many of the other options. Let's go to then 49. Glad you have handouts. It would be hard to read on a screen. I apologize. Just a lot of information. Really wanted to get it all on one slide. But in chronological order from 1 to 8, we've listed the construction cost and the project cost. I think more importantly, let's go to the next slide. And I think this speaks very clearly as certainly cost is a consideration that you're seeing. And perhaps if you can, Tom, if you can go to the next slide, it might be a little more difficult for you to toggle back and forth. But maybe this is a better example without getting into the dollars. What's the least expensive? It's going to be the HHS. These are costs, not relocation considered. So that's number 1. You can see where 2 is. You can see where all the numbers are. And of course, 1, 2, and 3 are the most expensive. But I should note, if having looked at this diagram for a second, go back then to the previous page, and you'll see that between 8B, let's take the high end at 2.7. You can see the next one's 271, 279, 296, 3, and 3.4. So in fact, in some ways, I don't want to oversimplify this, but schemes between 8B and 5 are, I wouldn't say the price is negligible. I mean, money is money, but I think they're all kind of bundled in about the same area, if you will, if I can simplify it as I just did. So that is a quick rundown of the 50 pages. You're very patient. No doubt you have some questions, and maybe if you can cite the page number, we can go to that and we can help answer those questions.
Ms. Dennis.
I have a question. Why, if we don't need to build the new courtroom as big as the existing one, why do we have to?
Oh, we will build it the same as the existing one, roughly 1,600 square feet.
But that's not according to what am I looking for? The code is, or the recommendations from the state or whatever. But you said that, and then you said, but we would build it the same size.
The state's Chapter 68 guideline, I don't want to say requirement, is for 2,000 square feet for a juried courtroom. So 2,000 square feet. I think the state has, the new courtrooms that we're designing in facilities were in roughly maybe 1,700 square feet. And so I think the size of your present courtroom, I think works quite well and is consistent with other projects that we have done where the state has said that we will not insist that you build at the 2,000 square foot requirement. So if I'm making sense, I think what we're trying to do is to provide equality or parity between one courtroom to the other. Their functions are the same. The judge is a judgeship of general jurisdiction. It's a juried courtroom. You would want to have the gallery or the seating area to be roughly the same size. So at least from the judge's point of view and a prior district court administrator, what we discussed and agreed upon at that time last year was that we would simply build this new courtroom the same size as the current and existing one because it does function quite well. I don't know did I answer your question?
Thank you. Mr. Buckles.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe this question would go to Mr. Hoff. On these 4A through 8B, the price is a lot cheaper But relocating the existing employees, where would that take place? Or would we have to have another building for these people at another expense or what?
Yeah, that's possible, depending on the option that you took and the displacement of employees in the area that is used for the courtroom. They would have to go somewhere, and that's an important consideration. We're looking at the functionality of the courtroom, and Mr. Kane is trying to get the flow of traffic situated in each of these examples that satisfies the needs of the court. But we also have the needs of the county and the traffic flow within the existing building. And so we can't ignore, the other department's needs in this. So how do we relocate individuals, in the Health and Human Service option, for instance? That's one of those floors, but they occupy 2 floors in that building. And, to move half of them probably doesn't work. So, and that's a lot of people to move. So other options have less people that you're moving, but it's also important to give them functionality and hopefully improve their functionality. If we had to get them different space, either by shuffling other people around within the building, or potentially, yes, we would have to house them somewhere else. Some of the activity that we've been seeing over the last couple of months is allowing employees to work off-site. And as we're working through the issues that we've been experiencing the last couple of months, that gives us some idea of, does that work permanently or not? And I think in some areas it does, and in some areas it doesn't. But that's another option of remote working with employees. Housing them in another location is an option. And so those would have to be considered depending on which option that you were considering.
Well, yeah, that would be all right, I guess, but I'm wondering, then you got another expense on purchasing a building, and that's gonna put you right back up pretty close to scheme 1 and 2. Why go that option?
I agree.
It don't make sense.
Yep. Mr. Kane, you had made, you would rank some of these options in price, and then the number of parking spaces that it would displace, and also the number of employees that would need to relocate. But then you made the comment on 7B, and you said 7B really does not work. Would you and maybe Market Johnson rank these in what you think is the best options? Like 1 through 4 or 1 through 6? I know we're going to ask our maintenance person, Tim. I can't think of
Yeah.
the best.
Yeah.
Why Haggard was involved compared to the Haskins and Judge. Now, Mr. Haggard certainly going to know more about building than the judge would, I would think.
Thank you, Mr. Kane. But that's the question we have, Mr. Kane, is involve our maintenance, Tim Hagberg.
Yes.
And maybe you get with him and help us rank these, what you think, as far as construction, what would work the best. Okay?
So not tonight,
So,
but
Mr. Morgan.
I'm sorry, on page 25,
yeah.
scheme 4B, the Sally Port for the inmates, I see the arrow going into the new facility. Would we then do something different so that the Sally Port could also be used for the existing circuit court?
Yes.
Or
Yeah. I apologize. Yeah. There are some other arrows that could and should have been on this diagram. I think one of the nice things about this 4B option is that this inmate holding area has direct link to both courtrooms. So you're transporting prisoners, they're not going into the public hallway. So yeah, there should be another arrow. So take your big red pen and we have to figure out how to get, yeah. So there's going to be a little bit of remodeling in that option, 4B.
Yeah, and that's one you noted, Mr. Kane, that you liked quite a bit.
Yeah.
Okay,
yes.
gotta go with Mr. Slender.
So I have a question regarding option number 3. If we did build that one, are we moving both courtrooms into that new structure?
Correct.
Then
We're moving.
What would happen with this
Ask your question again. I interrupted you and I wasn't listening. I apologize.
So what happens if we move both courtrooms into the next building? What happens with the space that was the former courtroom?
It probably stays as a county boardroom. It stays as a public assembly space. I think there are probably a lot of reasons, a lot of functions that could go into that room. That I think over time you would find that space to be quite useful. I mean, I think the other question, I'll expand on your question, because what doing Scheme 3 will take other departments out of the existing courthouse as well. The clerk of court, register and probate, these all will move over to the new building. I apologize, I don't have the plan in front of me. I think we might have been even moving the district attorney over there, but I don't recall offhand. But the point very clearly was that in Scheme 3, and I respect the cost of that option, was to eliminate that transportation of offenders across the street or even in a vehicle, that there'd be a direct connection. I think our work here this year has been really focusing on accepting that transportation as it is, and then finding solutions to add on to or remodel the existing courthouse.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Helwig.
Oh, the third courtroom, use it as this courtroom you could still use as a courtroom, a third courtroom, and the board meeting room.
Yeah.
Possibility.
Thank you, Mr. Betcher.
Yeah, Mr. Kane, just want to say that personally, I think this is an excellent product, and I think that was whatever money we spent was a very good investment that may have very well saved us in excess of $1.5 to $2 million. So thank you for that. I do have a quick question though for the chairman. And again, I apologize if I'm coming in a little late. I'm not trying to make this more difficult. In fact, I'm trying to help maybe make this more simple. But you talked about 4 or 5 different committees discussing this, maybe compartmented or in a vacuum, and planning and deciding independently. I don't know if you've already discussed creating a special ad hoc committee or a task force type with 1 or 2 members from each of those committees. You know, you can automatically, I think, rule out a couple of these. You know, if it costs $12 million, throw that out. If you're going to displace 29 workers, throw that out. You get it down to the top 4 or so, create a pretty simple matrix based on a point system, and there's smart, board members here, and I think that a decision could be made pretty quickly. And maybe I'm just putting my military brain on this, but we use this. We have the military decision-making process. We have matrices, and we tackle problems like this all the time. We have military construction projects in the millions that we have to decide, have to get approved by Congress and stuff like that. So from the, a new guy coming in, it doesn't look like it should take a 2 or 3 year, time to make a decision on this. That's all.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, any other questions for Mr. Kane?
I don't have a question for Mr. Kane. I just to address just a statement.
Yes, go ahead, Ms. Pettit.
I want everybody to understand that this county's sole responsibility is not to a courthouse or a remodel. This county has many other responsibilities. The court system does not solely rule this county. We have responsibilities to other people that do not use the court system or are in court systems. The courthouse, this building, has many other departments that have nothing to do with the courthouse. And the money we're looking at spending, what is going to have to be cut for those departments? All of us need to sit back and look at that. We're talking about displacing workers. Yes, I totally understand that we could There's a lot of people that could work remotely, and it's working. That's why I asked in HHS that they poll their supervisors and see the productivity of our employees, and if they can continue to work remotely. There is also the Oasis building. If there is space in that Oasis building, HHS could possibly move into there, a portion of it. But us as board members, supervisors, we have a responsibility to all departments, not just the court system. That's just something I want to get across. I understand we're discussing this, but our responsibility is to every constituent in this county, not just the justice system.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Pettit. Mr. Kinsley.
Mr. Kane, this is Mr. Kinsley. Can you tell me the overall dimensions of the scheme 1 and scheme 2, please?
Oh, I don't know if I can do that.
Well,
that would be a guess on my part.
Okay. Maybe you could bring it to the next meeting, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What about Mr. Van Etten? Are you still on, sir? Did you want to say anything?
No, I'm good. I just agree with a lot that we should expedite if this has been going on for 3 years, and I wasn't part of that for 3 years. But I think it just comes down to we either need to make a decision or we don't, and just to move on. We're spending a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of resources researching this, and I'm ready to move forward.
Great. Mr. Kane, could you make yourself available for these committees that I mentioned that are going to address this here in early June?
Okay. As we are this evening over the phone.
Maybe not as in depth, but maybe just available if there's questions that Mr. Hoff
Sure.
or Tim Hagberg cannot answer.
Certainly. Just let me know certainly let me know when those times are, and we'll make myself available.
Okay, and then I'm looking at our finance chair, Mr. Paulson, and you, Mr. Kane. When would construction start if we were to make a decision in June? Bruce, you can also see, I see spring of 2021 written here.
Yeah.
I know we want this Second Circuit Court operating so we can see if it would work with visiting judges and visiting court staff, and if we need time to see if that does adequately reduce the caseload. Does that mean then, and what is the length of a construction phase on one of these options? Can we get it done in the summer of 2021?
No, no. Dean, are you on the call still?
I am.
Yeah. Let me answer your first question. I think that at the quickest that we could produce construction documents would be 5 months, something like that, maybe 4 months. That's really pushing it. I guess I'm thinking that by the time you get approvals and everything else, we're in the middle of the summer. With bidding and everything going on, you're probably a contractor might want to just simply wait until spring to start. Maybe depending upon which option. Several of these are going to require what I would call an enabling project. So let's take 4B, for example. You've got 3 departments that have to be relocated. Tom's going to go to that slide. We've got to find a home for them. They got to be moved into that space before that wing can be gutted. So we have to keep that in mind as well. That remodeling might be fairly limited. If I could be so bold as to suggest that maybe those departments, again, 4B went to where zoning is, maybe they would fit in there. There's some construction of vaults would have to be completed, fireproofing. We have to address that. But that would have to be done, that relocation would have to happen before you could begin that spring construction with the addition and remodeling. Each one of these probably has a different timeline in terms of construction. I know, Dean, maybe you can chime in just a little bit.
Yeah, well, I mean, they all kind of have their varying complexities, but I would think you're looking at anyone you did, some are 6 to 8 months to get them done. I mean, that's after everyone's relocated and we get ripping and tearing. I also did want to mention, I have the square footages for Scheme 1 and Scheme 2 in some paperwork I have here. Scheme 1 is, well, both of them are just, one's a little bit over 11,600 square feet, and Scheme 2 was just a little bit under 11,600. So they're both roughly around 11,600.
Okay, thank you.
What's the outside dimension?
Yeah. Does he have that answer, Mr. Kane, do you think?
I mean, the dimensions, what Ron was asking for?
Yes, sir.
Oh, I don't have that offhand. No, I will get it in the morning and I will send it to Tom.
Good.
Yeah, I wouldn't wager a guess.
Mr. Olson.
Mr. Betcher broached the subject and he said, are there a few of these we can just take off the table? And I would hate to have Mr. Kane put in any more time or have any more discussion on ones that, I mean, if we think they just are not going to be financially feasible or viable, can we just take them off the table now?
Yeah. Well, I put this on for discussion only. Mr. Kane, how much time would it take for you to rank these options, like I asked, workable and really a lot more?
Well, I think I apologize. I can do it tonight. I apologize. A week. I think if we could with Tim. Are you wanting the judge involved in this? I should ask. He's not been. Do you want his opinion on this, or are we keeping him out of the conversation?
No, I think we need his opinion, and we for sure need Tim Hagberg's.
Yeah. So my suggestion is that. Go ahead. I apologize.
And our clerk of court.
Yeah. Well, I think the judge and the clerk of court could they could meet and just look at what we've got here tonight. If you want me to participate in that discussion, I would be happy to. But I think that they would look through these and have some pretty strong opinions fairly quickly, would be my guess. I think Tim and Dean and I from Market and Johnson and Tim could have a call, the three of us, this next week, and we could talk through them. I do greatly appreciate Market and Johnson's opinion in terms of the constructability of these options. I think you've certainly got a sense maybe of some of my thoughts, particularly with the 7s and the 8s. I just think that is just really complicated construction. Some of them are much easier than others. But I think I would want Tim and Dean, for the three of us, to rank them in that regard.
Okay, Ms. Dennis.
Something else that I think we have to keep in mind too, at one of our committee meetings, and I believe it was admin, we talked about our courthouse doesn't have enough room not only for the judge, but for other departments. And let's look at this, down the road as we're growing. We need to think about more room. So what, do we keep adding on and adding on? Can we put some of these people elsewhere at a more reasonable rate, such as if we have to buy someplace here, there's offices for sale, and it's not going to hurt to look at them. But that would give us, we would be freeing up more office space and room as we grow, and we are going to grow. So
thank you, Ms. Dennis. Mr. Schlender.
So I support Mr. Betcher's recommendation that you convene probably the chairs of those committees and any other interested board members to come and have a discussion about this so that we can do a kind of a punch list so that we can answer these questions. Mr. Kinsley's questions are actually fair. The mask doesn't allow me to show me my, sarcasm or smile or whatever. But so, but I think that, we have, the judge is an elected official, the clerk of court's an elected official. Is the register of deeds an elected official? Yes. So these people have a constitutional responsibility for the services that they're providing, and they're going to be impacted. I disagree with this idea that we're only focusing on the criminal justice system, and I agree with Ms. Dennis's discussion that we need to look at this in terms of what this government building is offering, and it's being labeled as a second courtroom and a second judge, and it's narrowing the discussion, but it's not fairly discussing the impact. We're going to, probably say that option number 3 is off the table, but we're going to be penny wise and dollar foolish if we don't look at the space use that we're doing right now. And if you were to sit in on an HHS meeting, you would hear about the HIPAA concerns about people being so close together that the walls don't even maintain the confidentiality that they're entitled to. And then you're talking about zoning, you're talking about the vaults in the Registered and Deeds office. We're dealing with a building in 1960, and we're trying to make this work in the 21st century. And so I think if you get that group together, you can have a real conversation and figure this out and be informed of what the decision is. I mean, we're not all going to agree clearly, but at least we all have a fair chance to discuss.
Appreciate that. Mr. Helwig?
Did Mr. Kane say he was thinking that 7 through 8 were probably not best to look at?
I did say that.
Okay. I think he said 7 through 8, didn't he?
7 through 8, yeah.
Okay.
When I look at other options that are available, I think 7 and 8s are problematic.
There it is. Okay. Mr. Kane, I look forward to your call then.
Yeah.
And I will convene my committee, some of my committee chairs and Mr. Hoff and the judge. And then we'll come with a recommendation to the full county board as it goes through the committees also. So in June, we can make an informed decision. Is there
Very
any
good.
further discussion for Mr. Kane tonight?
Okay. Thank you all.
Yep. Appreciate it.
Yep. Bye.
And as that information comes in from Mr. Kane, we'll get it to the full county board. So everybody gets to look at that.
Chairman Schuman?
All right then, moving on to county administrators report. Mr. Hoff?
Was there a question from a board member?
Oh.
Yeah.
Ms. Pettit, did you have a question?
Shouldn't the department heads, if we're going to be displacing some of the departments, shouldn't the department heads be in on some of the discussion?
Mr. Hoff?
Yeah, I can help answer that question. This past week, we've been meeting with all the departments about a lot of issues. One being, the possible displacement of certain departments, also the 20 budget, the 21 budget, how we're going to work all that into it. We've been talking about who can work from home and who isn't, the COVID-related activities that we're doing. So it's really a lot of good discussion with a lot of the departments, but the main point was trying to figure out, like the work structure. We've got the workflow here on the court system and the three-way separation, and the public comes in here and the inmates come in there. It's also important that we keep in mind, the interaction, like if you're displacing like the treasurer and the register of deeds and clerk, right now they're all together. How do they function together? What kind of interaction do they have? Do we still need, 3 separate counters? Can we combine the counters? So those kinds of discussions that, we're having with the departments to try and help figure out those interactions and the traffic flow within the courthouse and how we can make that efficient as well. So, that's the other side of the equation, and we're trying to get that information so that we'll be ready to determine who needs to move where and how that all happens.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Hoff. Does that answer it, Mr. Pettit?
Yes. Shouldn't we kind of assess how that affects curtain services also when we're talking to the department heads? It's going to affect, if HHS has to go, it affects everybody that comes in to this courthouse for services, for WIC, for food, food stamps, everything, gas, electric, it affects all of that. So we need to assess how that, how that's going to affect our services to the public.
Yep. Appreciate that.
Yeah, some departments have interactions with, Senior Resource Center as well, which is located right next to us. The Veterans Office has some interaction, with HHS too. So those things all come into play as well.
Okay, Mr. Hoff, County Administrator's report, please.
Yeah, so I did provide a report, and we can go over a couple of things here. We did talk a little bit about the building access and what we're doing within the building related to the COVID response. We still have the building, a single point of entry to the building. People that are coming into the building are encouraged to mask. We do leave masks by the front door as they come in, and have some education about that as well. Offices are still locked, appointment only interaction with the public. We're here to help the public. We encourage them to do it through the website or by phone if possible, but we will meet with the public if necessary. So we're going to continue on that. We still have a lot of people working outside of the building. I envision that continuing for a while yet until we see how things go after things are opened up. Not in a big hurry to move people back into the building, until we get everything figured out. So status quo on that. Maintenance has been doing a good job cleaning the building. We've added a couple other cleaning routines to ensure that, areas are deep cleaned every so often as well. So we've added that to their repertoire. As I mentioned, the department directors that we've had this week, we've got, virtually 20 other departments that are functioning in different services within the county, and trying to coordinate those together, and the staffing needs and the budgetary needs. As we've discussed, we are expending some money in this COVID response. We are tracking that so that we can get reimbursed when some of the federal money and the FEMA money becomes available. On the revenue side, as we mentioned before, there was a package introduced that hasn't passed, and we don't know what form that would pass if it does. But the revenues that we're looking at most seriously, of course, is the sales tax revenue and the shortfalls that we're seeing there because of the economic downturn. So how long the economic downturn lasts will kind of determine how our budget will continue as well. So it's an unfortunate thing that we're all going through, and we're all learning to process things in a different way. And I'm really encouraged by the fact that the employees that we have been great to work with and doing things differently. And it's been a challenge, but it's been great to work with staff. So they've been been towing the line for us, and we appreciate it. I think Mr. Schlender alluded to the fact the CJCC didn't meet this month due to a lack of quorum. That's another area that we can really put our heads together. Those are all the major players in what we're talking about here with the court system. You know, we've got the DA and the sheriff and the judge and all the court-related staff related to that. The other important piece with the CJCC and the drug testing, now that the court is going to start up again, the retirement of our CJ coordinator, criminal justice coordinator, will be happening at the end of June. She did make that public, so she will be retiring, which leaves us a big hole to fill. Not only personnel-wise, she's been a good asset for the county for a number of years, but how we do some of those processes in the future, we really need to rethink that and rethink that through the Criminal Justice Coordinating Committee and deciding what we want that to look like. What kind of drug programs do we want? What kind of rehabilitation programs do we want? Because that's where that's going to come out of, and the personnel that it takes to get those programs up and running. You know, the TAG grant funding the next 5-year window is coming up next year, so it's important that we have something functioning so that we can tap into that major funding source for those projects. And that's going to be critical moving forward. So just another challenge that we need to work through. So I can answer any other questions on other items you have, but those are kind of the hot topics at the moment.
Okay, anything else for Mr. Hoff?
Mr. Hoff,
Yes.
it's Miss
Yes,
Pettit.
Ms. Pettit.
How many employees are leaving our services? I know the CG, you just said CJC clerk of the court also, and the county clerk. Are there other employees also, or elected officials?
No, what I said was the criminal justice coordinator announced her retirement. So it's just that one individual that is retiring.
And do we have other people that are not? Is the clerk of court not coming back next year? Is the county clerk not coming back?
No, those are elections, right, in November, Carol?
August primary, November election for county clerk, register of deeds, and treasurer.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Yep, thank you, Ms. Pettit. Anything else for Mr. Hoff? Good, okay. Then we'll move on to other matters for discussion only. Mr. Morgan, do you want to explain the county officials workshop that's coming up by webinar, I think, starting in June?
It is, and it normally is a full day that they do throughout the state at different locations. Obviously, during the current circumstances, they're dividing it up into 4 hour-and-a-half webinars, one each week of June. I believe it was sent out. I believe Mr. Hoff sent it out to all of the members. It is not just for new members, it's for new and old members, and there's really useful information. So I would really urge everyone to attend if you can.
Is there a fee for that, Mr. Morgan? And
No, we are
pre-registered?
Wisconsin County Association members, so there is no fee for anyone to attend.
Okay. Mr. Kinsley, did you have anything? Free of charge, okay.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir, Mr. Hoff.
Yeah, just another note regarding that. Those sessions, if you register for them and can attend live, then you can interact during the sessions, but they also record those so that you can watch them at a different time if you're not available to make one of those sessions. You just lose the ability to ask any questions when you do it that way. So it is good to hit the meetings if you can.
Okay, anything else? We're adjourned. I appreciate all your attendance.